Hi, all, and welcome to Unseen Strands, my new podcast where I, your host, Mo, am visually impaired and plan on sharing with you strands of my life. This will be a mostly crochet and fiber arts related podcast, although there will also be bits and pieces of the rest of my life woven in. I would like to start off apologizing for my shaky voice. I am currently getting over a cold. Since this is our first episode, I would like to focus on telling you a bit about myself, as well as announcing an along I would like to begin. This will take up the majority of our time this week, as I wish to keep these episodes fairly short. I promise our future episodes will have a lot more crafting. So a bit about my vision. I was born with a rare genetic disorder which has left me blind all of my life. Although as a child I began to steadily gain vision, when I became about a junior in high school, I began to dramatically lose my vision. Since they do not know a whole lot about my disorder yet, all they can tell me is that at some point I will probably go completely blind. At this point in my 30s, I have mainly just your peripheral vision, which is your side vision, as well as a little bit of light and shadow straight on. As there is nothing they can currently do to solve my vision, and the fact that the nearest specialist for me to see is several hundred miles away, I haven't seen a specialist for many years. Luckily, my disorder is from a rare recessive trait, so even though I have 3 siblings, none of them have the same visual issues as I do. When we were pregnant with my first child, we decided to get my husband tested. He is also not a carrier of this recessive trait. So even though our children will all be carriers of this trait, none of them should have any children with the same visual issues as I have unless they were to find a spouse with the same genetic disorder trait. I also have color blindness, although it is not your typical red-green color blindness. As a child, this was mostly just blue-green color blindness, although today it is a lot more anything that is around the same tone as each other. So I could have a blue and a gray that I couldn't tell apart, or I could even have like a red and a purple that I couldn't tell apart just because they were somewhere around the same shade. Often this means when I am filling orders in my Etsy shop, I have to have my children around to read me labels. I think one of the most difficult things about being blind is meeting new people. I used to be able to visually identify people to some extent, but now that I have basically lost all my straight-on vision, I am left with only identifying people by voice, and this is a very imperfect art. And I guess that's about all I have to share about my vision today. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, because even though I have no problems talking about my vision problems, I really have no idea what other people want to know. On to some other things about myself. I am a mother of 4 boys, the oldest being Jeremy, who is 10, then Sam, who is 7, and then my set of twins, who just turned 1 year old, Leo and Zane. We also have 2 kitties, Naru and Motoko, who are about 13 and 12 years old, and then in July we got ourselves a dog, Sona, who is about 6 years old. We own our own home in central Iowa, and I have lived in the state of Iowa for my entire life. I grew up on the east side of the state, along the Mississippi, and then when I graduated from high school, I moved to the same town as my husband, which is in north central part of the state. When he got his dream job about 2 years ago, we moved about an hour away to pretty much the direct center of the state. My husband and I began chatting on a program called ICQ. This was at a time when it was still unusual to meet people in person that you had started talking to online. We happened to know someone who used to live in the town he lived in, and her mom knew his mom, and was good friends with her. And she then had moved to the town that I lived in, and so we were able to kind of know each other through this common thread. Needless to say, it all worked out, and I have to say that meeting him was one of the best decisions in my entire life. A few other random facts about myself. I like dolphins. I like the color blue, which can be anything from like a midnight blue to a sapphire blue to teal and aqua. So pretty much everything along the blue line. I also like color. So I love rainbow. So it can be any kind of rainbow. It doesn't just have to be your normal Roy G. Biv rainbow. As a child, when I was coloring, I would often color my backgrounds rainbow. This would not be your typical rainbow, but pretty much every crayon color I had with me. I would just pick a segment of the background and color it in, and then fill in from there. I have found that my second child, Sam, also has a fascination with rainbow and coloring in things with your not typical color schemes. This was probably also not helped with the brand name of Lisa Frank. Anyone else remember this? I guess I find my color fascination kind of odd, since I have so much trouble anymore telling colors apart, but I still would rather have a colorful world than a very plain world. I think pretty much the only color I can't stand is white. This is partially a blind thing, as not only is it a terrible color for me to wear, as I am not exactly your neatest eater, but it also becomes an issue when it's in something like the paint of a car. A lot of my aversion to white being a car color is the fact that on sunny days, this is actually even painful for me to look at. This can also be common with a very light silver or bright gold color, although these are not usually as bad as just pure white. Anywho, away from colors, I do not cook. My husband is the cook of our household, which is handy since the first 17 years of his working life he worked in a kitchen. Although this has become a problem as of late, as now I am our main grocery shopper. Thanks to online grocery ordering, I can now order groceries from home and have them either delivered to my husband at work or delivered straight to my home, which is awesome because I know they say groceries can't put themselves away, but many times I find, especially with pop, they will ask me exactly where I want it, which means it gets put away for me, which means the groceries have put themselves away. And what could be better than that? As I was born in October, my sign is a Libra. This is actually a really good fit for me, and you can probably assume a lot about me simply by thinking of the characteristics of this sign. My husband, however, is an Aquarius, and he does not fit his sign at all. I find myself to be a relatively frugal person, as well as a relatively realistic person. This often finds myself to be in a clash with many of the people around me, as millennials tend to be more of a dreaming generation than a realistic generation. I really don't know when I began to crochet, although I know that when I was in 4th grade, I tried to finish my first baby blanket for my teacher, who was expecting a boy by the end of the year. I did not finish this blanket for her, but I still have it around to remind me of where I've been and where I have come from. My mom was my crochet teacher. She is not a very adventurous crocheter though, so she only has about 2 or 3 blankets that she does, as well as she will edge washcloths. When I became a teenager, I was no longer satisfied with this type of crocheting, so I began to investigate on ways to continue my education, till I am now at the point where I pretty much crochet everything. I have made things from doilies, to scrubbers, to king-size blankets, to hats, to mittens, to scarves, and even things like pine mats. By the time I had graduated from high school, I had already completed several projects for myself, my family, and my friends. I had already taken commission on a few projects, although at that time I had pretty much only charged for the cost of materials, so I had basically worked for free. It was not until I was a mom that I had actually started my Etsy shop, as it was a fellow mom from a mom group that had suggested that I start to sell on it. Nowadays, I pretty much crochet just for myself and my family, as it has become very time consuming to raise 4 children. Although I am still doing items on Etsy, such as washcloths and scrubbers, and I am still making plarn mats as my charitable item. I have found that I actually have an asset in being a blind crocheter. I have recently discovered that others have many difficulties with dark colored yarns, especially black. Since I feel my work and do not ever need to look at it, I do not have the same difficulty. Actually, I did not even know it was a thing until I started listening to podcasts and watching YouTube videos and noticing that many people have a very big aversion to this color. I also have very little difficulty in finding my corners. This may not be true with things like single crochet, where it can still be difficult to figure out where the end of the row is versus the edge, but it is almost impossible for me to miss the edge of a double crochet round. I am much more likely to have missed a stitch because I am crocheting too quickly, or have gained an extra stitch from crocheting in the same spot that I was already in, than to miss my corner. Although there is one place that my mom still does better than I do in crochet, whereas I have found that the size 10 thread is about as thin as I can go, she still enjoys her size 30 when crocheting washcloths. I also began to spin this summer. We went to our first sheep and wool festival, and this is where I learned to drop spindle. My son, Jeremy, was also spinning with me, so I had given him the spindle that we had purchased at the festival, and we had created myself a spindle out of Tinker Toys, which works rather well, by the way. But since Jeremy has decided not to spin with me, I have decided to take over both spindles, and now have a new problem with my stash and deciding that I need more fiber for it. It's the most wonderful time of the year. Now let's start talking about what I like to call our inspirational along. This will be starting October 14th, 2017, and ending on January 5th, 2018. These dates may sound strange to you, but I am trying to include the entire holiday season, and I know as crafters we need plenty of time to prep. This is why we are starting so early and ending so late, as many people have holiday celebrations that start as early as Thanksgiving and others that don't get over until the beginning of January. Now these dates are also special to me, as October 14th is my birthday and January 5th is my sister's birthday. Entries for our along need to have been started after our along has started October 14th and need to be posted before January 6th. Your entries may be any handcrafted gift for the holiday season. It may be a Ravelry craft, but is not limited to Ravelry crafts. Ravelry crafts include crochet, knitting, weaving, and spinning. Other crafting may include things like sewing, card making, or baking, although they may have more limited rules on what will count as an entry. Such as card making, I consider all the cards that you have made to be one entry instead of one entry per card made. In addition to crafting, since we are trying to inspire giving hearts, I am also going to give entries for service projects. This may include things like making a meal for the homeless, ringing the bell for Red Kettle, or something like filling a shoebox for Operation Christmas Child. The only catch to any of these entries is you must have a photo to show that you have actually participated in the event. Feel free to come over to Ravelry to post any questions and your entries in our thread. Our podcast group is called the Unseen Strands Podcast. We have just the one thread for all activities this year, as I anticipate I will be able to keep up with the level of activity. We currently have one prize. This will be any pattern of the winner's choice on Ravelry of $5 or less. If you are interested in donating a prize to this along, it is easiest to reach me on Ravelry. I am Moe's Crochet, which is M-O-E-S. You can also find me by Moe's Crochet on a few other platforms. I am Moe's Crochet on Instagram and Pinterest, although I currently do not use Pinterest because my computer settings make it so none of the pictures show up, and since that's kind of the point of Pinterest, I currently am not using it. Currently, you can also type in moescrochet.etsy.com to bring up my shop, since this is the name I started my account under. Although my shop is actually now Hooked on Moe's. The Moe's in Hooked on Moe's is spelled M-O-E-Z. When I had changed my shop name, I had decided to include my husband partially, and his screen name we decided to use was Crazy Z. So at the time I had changed my shop name, I was also carrying Crazy Z Caramels, although right now he is too busy to actually do his caramel making with us. So at the time, we're still Hooked on Moe's with the Z on the end instead of an S, even though we don't really have any of the Crazy Z caramels still in the shop. I also go under Hooked on Moe's on Twitter and Facebook. We also have an Etsy shop for the kids. This would be Jeremy and Sam. This mainly is die cut and paper goods that they have either hand punched out or that my husband has cut with the die cutting machine. Their shop name is Moe's Kids. So that's moeskidz.etsy.com. We thought it was kind of clever to keep the Z on the end as kind of our family trait. Although I was sad to find out that there is already a Moe's Kids on Instagram and Twitter. I did not know this when I went and created their shop, and don't know who had the name first, and now they have both had the accounts for a couple of years. But we are Moe's Kids on Etsy and Facebook. That's it this week for what I have to share with you. This will probably be twice a month or bi-monthly podcast, although we may do another episode next week since this episode really didn't carry any of the actual crafting content. If you liked our episode this week, I'd appreciate it if you would hook the like button and subscribe. Thanks all, and I hope you'll be hearing from me soon.